Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. So our friend Ivan, who is coming out here and there. It's in the suitcase. It's okay. So our little friend here, Ivan, is has been staying here at the monastery for a little while and has always a lot of interesting questions, like right now, or a lot of interesting contributions. And so he's a little 8-year-old boy who was very new to Buddhism. And today he was telling me about his brother, who is 4 years old. And so he was telling me how basically, you know, he used to run around so much, his brother. And then he turned up to me and he was like, you know, I've calmed down a lot. You know, I've really calmed down a lot. And I was like, yeah, it's true, actually. I do remember that you used to be quite a lot more restless than you are right now. And he was like, yes, I've calmed down a lot. I've calmed down a lot. And I was like, oh, so why did you calm down a lot? And he was like, well, as soon as I saw my brother running around like a maniac, I just like calmed down. I stopped doing it. And it was so interesting because it was just, you know, like a random story that he shared. But actually I found it so profound in a way that sometimes you know, we are so wrapped up in our experience, we're so wrapped up in our habits that we're completely unaware of how they're affecting us and how they're affecting people around us. But when we see those habits reflected in someone else, then it becomes like a mirror. And then we can have a bit of an insight, an opening, or can go like, I don't know, do I actually want to run around like a crazy person, like a maniac? Or do I actually want to calm down a little bit? Maybe I want to calm down. And he had a bunch of these stories actually about a lot of different, also his friends in school. And all of this, though, it was also beautiful how he was talking about all these things, because he was never really judgmental. He wasn't saying, oh, these people are mean, or I am superior, or whatever. But it was just more an insight in a behavior that he was also in an action that he was also doing, but that when he saw it in others, it became impersonal. And so he was like, actually, I don't want to keep doing this behavior. I don't want to keep nurturing this mind state, for example. It's not really beneficial. It's not useful. I don't need it, so I can let it go. And in that simple way, he was able to let it go. An 8-year-old child. And at the same way, like even though this was his 3rd day at the monastery in total, he was here last weekend for a day, and then he came on Friday, etc. It was so interesting to see how he was picking up different behaviors that he was seeing, different habits of peacefulness, different habits of tranquility, or at least the aspiration to shift in that way. And so we see how beautiful that can and transformative it can be when actually we stop, you know, identifying so much with our characteristics, our traits, our habits, and thinking that they define us, but rather having a bit of that sort of more fluid, more relaxed attitude, more third person attitude, where we can go like, oh, this unwholesome habit or this unwholesome quality is present in me. I don't want that. Or this wholesome habit or this wholesome trait is present in me. Let me nourish it. Or, oh, that person has a wholesome habit. Let me also see how I can cultivate that. Or those people have those unwholesome habits. Maybe I don't want to do that as well. And so this is basically a very insightful, very kind of interesting way that a fresh 8-year-old kid can have very like, very somewhat easy way in doing something so difficult, like actually looking into having an understanding of one of the characteristics of the 3 characteristics that the Buddha says that permeates basically our entire experience, which is the characteristic of anatta. So he says that everything that is conditioned has 3 characteristics. The characteristic of anicca, impermanence, the characteristic of dukkha, which is normally translated as suffering, and the characteristic of anatta, the characteristic of impersonality, of not self. And when we understand that, these traits, for example, if we have a habit of anger, or if we have a habit of restlessness, or if we have a habit of anything, even a drug habit, even a drinking habit, even a painting habit, even a creative habit, whatever kind of habit we have, all of that is impermanent. All of that is arising because there are certain conditions in place. Hence, it's not who we are. It's something that is currently present due to causes and conditions and is impersonal. It's anatta, non-self. And also suffering. Our states of suffering are also impermanent, are also not something that define us, not something that is permanent, not something that has to be there. But actually, we can, in every single moment, create the causes and conditions, or shift the causes and conditions in order to get a different result, a result that instead is a cessation of suffering rather than an increase of suffering. But we're able to do this if we take a step away. If we start seeing things not so wrapped up with them, not so attached with them, not so like, this is me, but rather we step a little bit away and we look at what are we experiencing, what are the conditions that are currently present in the mind. And it's the same with meditation practice, actually. It's really no different. Now, at the very beginning, when we start meditating, perhaps, well, maybe at the very, very beginning can be actually very frustrating, right? We have a really hard time concentrating and so forth. But then if we stick to it, then it can become this really pleasant experience. That's why maybe a lot of us have heard mindfulness-based stress reduction, right? There's a reduction of our stress, a reduction of our suffering, reduction of the unpleasantness. But then if we stick to it, it can also be actually a whole nightmare. Can go to a retreat, and at the very beginning, our concentration is really good and sharp, and we're like, oh yes, so peaceful. Oh yes, I'm so fully enlightened right now. Very close to it. I'm really great at this concentration thing. And then all of a sudden we start maybe being bombarded by thoughts of killing actually other sentient being, or thoughts of torturing other sentient beings, or thoughts of like, who knows, past things that have happened to us that make us feel very in a state of suffering. And we can think, oh, well, just me right now. We can either have thoughts like, oh, I'm a horrible person that is having these thoughts, or everybody else around me is having a great time. Everybody's in first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. That other person is experiencing full nibbana, but I am here, all this emotional turmoil, etc. Can have all sorts of different ideas, and it can be very difficult. Sometimes, when we have retreats here, due to COVID, we haven't had that many, but we used to have these big retreats with lots of different people. And then at a certain point, some people couldn't take it anymore and they would run away. And similarly to other retreats, and actually myself included. I remember going to Bhavana Society, actually, where Bhante Jay used to live, and also Bhante Sudaso. That's where we also had met several years ago. I remember going to this retreat where it was exactly like this, really beautiful. Had a really great time, and then mid-retreat, after the 4 days, all these thoughts started appearing in the mind, obsessive thoughts. And it was so painful. If I had had a driver's license and a car, and I hadn't been in West Virginia, in the middle of nowhere, I would have been one of those people who would have run away, because it was so difficult. That mind was so difficult to bear. And it was not something that I thought that, that those thoughts were present in me. So when they appeared, it was very, very difficult it was very challenging, right? So in that moment, I remember understanding fully, like, oh, that's why people can have a hard time. That's why those people I was already organizing retreats. So I remember thinking, oh, that's why people run away. The mind can be this whole really Pandora's box that you open it up, and maybe the first layer can be kind of clean, and then you keep on digging, and then there's all these feces essentially, and there's this stench. And if we start identifying with the stench, then our first input is to get the lid and kind of try to close it. But the reality is that actually, well, first of all, the lid is faulty. And the stench, the feces, is still there. So what we want to do is not try to escape from all of this dukkha, all of this suffering in that way, but rather try to be brave enough to take it all up, clean up the box, and then also throw away the box, because we understand fully what the box is. But all of this process can be a little bit uncomfortable at first. And it's uncomfortable because we identify with that. If thoughts of hatred appear in the mind, we start thinking, I am the hateful person. If thoughts of harming, we start thinking, I am the person who wants to harm others. Even if thoughts of love appear in the mind, or I am the loving person, or I am the compassion, I, me, whatever it is, we feel it attached. Whether it's something wholesome or unwholesome, we feel it attached. We identify with it. And that's why it's so difficult to let it go. Sometimes we can be so used to also states of suffering, states of depression. If any one of you has, I don't know if any one of you has been depressed, but I remember the times when I used to be depressed, actually, there was something also quite delicious in it. I remember putting the right music that would make me even more depressed, and that would trigger certain thoughts where I could go oh yeah, everything sucks, it's really terrible, right? There is something kind of sweet and horrible at the same time that we kind of indulge in. And it's the same with anger. Whenever we're, for example, experiencing a lot of anger, righteous indignation, there is that sense of righteousness that feels really good, right? And then, of course, also the distress of actually having an angry mind, or the distress of shouting at people, or the regret afterwards of doing things that perhaps we didn't really want to do afterwards, or was that really a good choice? Now I have to also reap the consequences of all these people not liking me, and so forth. But anyway, these habits, all of these things are become habits. So something that essentially is familiar. We have a saying in Italian that goes, whoever leaves the known road, lascia strada vecchia per la nuova, the one who leaves the old road for the new one knows what they leave behind, but they don't know what they are going to find. And that's basically kind of pretty much how we go about our lives. We have our kind of safe little space, whether it's, that wholesome or not unwholesome, it doesn't really matter, but we're kind of like comfortable with it. We're comfortable with the suffering. We're comfortable. We also define it as normal. Also at large as a society, if you go to any average, therapist that is not Buddhist in the West, and you say, I want to be completely rid of greed, hatred, and delusion, they're going to tell you you're crazy. Western psychology tells you that essentially a mind of greed, hatred, and delusion is normal, is standard, because it is. In fact, it is. The majority of sentient beings have a mind of greed, hatred, and delusion. And so we're so used to that we think that that is what is normal and that there is nothing else besides that. But the Buddha instead comes with much more incredible piece of information, which is actually doesn't have to be this way. Actually, we don't have to suffer. We don't have to be 90% depressed and 10% happier. We can actually be 100% happy. And it can be so difficult to even like grasp it intellectually. How could that be? How could that be possible? But as we start practicing, as we start dedicating ourselves to this practice, we start seeing that actually all these habits don't have to be, who we are, don't have to define us, don't have to be present with us all the time. And actually we start learning how to be happy in certain circumstances that we thought we would never be happy. Like there's no Neapolitan pizza, for example, in West Orange, like Neapolitan as in like how you find it in Italy. And up until becoming a Buddhist monk, I literally, it's really embarrassing, but I will embarrass myself. That was my criteria. I would not live in a place where there was not Neapolitan pizza available for longer than 2 months. Literally, that was basically every single place that I lived. In New York City, I would find a Neapolitan pizza place from an immigrant who would make that type of pizza in London as well. Like it was really crafted also in Italy. Because that was where essentially my happiness was dependent on, or my conditional happiness of that, like 1 hour a week. I was like, okay, at least that is reliable, right? But then you start seeing actually, it's okay. I can be totally happy without having Neapolitan pizza once a week, once a month, once a year, or at all. We were in Italy actually for an entire month and I didn't even have pasta. Because for our monastic rules, we can only eat we can't eat after solar noon. So there was no pasta after. Usually Italians don't eat pasta for breakfast. But they usually eat it around like 1 to 2 p.m. So usually after our time. So nobody was really offering us pasta. And up until Buddhist practice, it would have been unthinkable for me to be ever happy. We were very attached to food back where I come from. But yeah, that's, it doesn't matter whether it's food or anything. We really do, all of us, have a certain way, certain pattern, certain habit that we don't question. But the teachings of the Buddha are about questioning that. And also saying how all of these things don't define ourselves. They are not who we are. And we can toss whatever creates the conditions of suffering, and we can instead nurture what eliminates suffering from our mind until we can become 100% always relaxed, always peaceful, always have our safe mind, safe space that is independent of others, is independent of external conditions. So these are just a few different thoughts that have arisen due to my nephew picking up from the door. So maybe we can put our palms together and with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So at this point, if you have any questions or thoughts or comments, you're also more than welcome to disagree. And we can take it from there. Also for the other venerables as well. Or we can do more meditation. It's not a threat.
No questions?
No questions online. Lots of thanks, Anjali, Bante, Varapanya.
Oh, hello, Bante. Good to see you. Can also be unrelated questions, unrelated to what I've said. Can also be, why do you shave your head? Why do you all wear the same clothing? Yes, Vikram.
Unrelated. You started off by saying lying down is the way advanced practice. I actually been to some courses, Tibetan courses, where actually they start the other way.
Mm.
They want you to completely relax first. I wanted to know if either of you, or actually all three of you, have any thoughts about that approach, which is to start off with getting deeply relaxed first before starting to concentrate.
Well, I want to ask the question then, how was that experience for you of lying down and relaxing? Good? Great, wonderful. Yeah, so usually from my experience, if someone has a restless mind, which I'm not saying that that is your situation, but if one hindrance is restlessness in meditation, then lying down actually can be a very good way of relaxing oneself and settling the mind for meditation afterwards. But the majority of people, from my experience, as soon as they lie down, they start sleeping or spacing out, because usually the reclined position is the position that one holds when they're sleeping or they're about to sleep. So it just kind of dulls the mind a little bit. So that's why usually we say it's the advanced practice, it's the advanced position, because one actually needs to have a very good, concentrated, and very well-developed mind in order to be able to actually meditate in a reclining position. This being said, my hindrance, the reason why I was saying that my hindrance is restlessness, so I actually never have, when I fall asleep in meditation, it's because I haven't slept. So dullness and sleepiness has not ever been my hindrance so far, actually, and since the beginning of my practice. Once again, if anyone sees me dozing off, it's because I haven't slept like in 3 days or something like that, but not because I'm not interested in the meditation subject, etc. So restlessness would have been more my the kind of like defilement, the hindrance that would come more to my mind. And so lying down, and actually I always love, whenever I go to bed, I start meditating. If, like, for example, there's some insomnia or kind of I want to do something else, so then yes, I find it extremely relaxing. And then my meditation can be really good. I can actually do silent illumination, no problem, after doing a period of lying down meditation. So it's individual. It's not a kind of black and white sort of statement, or sort of like, oh, only this type of meditation is good, only that type of meditation is that. But it's more, I would say that usually the majority of people, one would say, and it's kind of like the same reason why one usually starts with mindfulness of breathing. It works for a lot of different people, the majority of people, actually, I would say. But then you would find some people, like, for example, myself, where mindfulness of breathing at the very beginning was impossible to do. I remember asking, actually, Bante J at Favana Society during my first retreat. That I did there. It was like, how do you do this? Mindfulness of breathing. I really cannot, I just don't understand how to watch the breath. It was impossible for me. It took me so many years, actually, to understand how to do mindfulness of breathing. And now it's one of my main meditation subjects. So we have to all become acquainted with what our conditions are and start understanding and practicing. But usually, the majority of people actually have an easier time doing mindfulness of breathing. Even my little nephew, Ivan, who's 8 years old, has a good time doing that, but a very hard time doing lying down meditation without falling asleep. So these would be my thoughts. I don't know if the Venerables want to share.
That's pretty thorough.
Bante Jay? No? Okay.
Meditating of counting to 5 and then going down, counting up to 6 and going down all the way up to 10. And so like I can do that. I can count I can focus on the breath, but then that's all I focus on. I either focus on the pebbles going down or I focus on the breath. But like you're saying, to like clean out whatever is like in there. So what's another? So because I can focus on one thing for a long time, but then, I don't know, clearing up the inner emotions, I guess.
Yeah, so
Meditation for that.
I seem to understand that what you're saying is that it comes easier for you to do more of a sort of concentration practice, let's say, rather than insight practice. I usually don't distinguish too much most of them, because usually the way that I cultivate my samadhi practice, so my concentration practice, is through insight. But once again, actually getting back to what we were saying with Vikram, that's actually one of the rarest forms of practice amongst practitioners. Usually people will cultivate insight by the way of by cultivating a concentrated mind first. But usually, I mean, it's kind of like washing the hands. It's samatha and vipassana. You want to tranquilize the mind in order to also then see the defilements and uproot the defilements. So it's part of practice. So it might also be that you're now in the having a great time with your concentration practice.
I was really terrible before, but that part I can focus now more.
Wonderful.
Now it's...
Yeah. So then it can happen at a certain point of your practice where a bunch of different thoughts will appear in the mind that will be very unpleasant. That's what kind of I was referring to. So meditation practice can be blissful, but then also a lot of different things can appear during your practice, which is also like flashbacks from maybe this life, maybe things that you actually have no idea what they are. Maybe from past lives, as we say, and just even the Buddha, in the lifetime where he became a Sammasambuddha, so someone fully awakened. So before his enlightenment, while he had already cultivated so many paramis, so many incredible qualities of mind, where he was, just one step towards becoming someone who was going to awaken themselves fully. He talks about it. I love all those suttas when he says, when I was still an unenlightened bodhisattva, so someone unenlightened, thoughts of greed, thoughts of hatred, thoughts of delusion would appear in my mind. And then he talks about how he relates to them. So he would go and observe these thoughts, not hide away from them, not run away from them, but rather go like, is this beneficial for myself? Is this beneficial for others? Is this beneficial for myself and others? So he would qualify, like, look at these thoughts, evaluate these thoughts, and then toss them out. So if right now, you're just cultivating, concentrated mind and having a really great time in meditation practice, keep doing what you're doing. But so you know, it will be impermanent. At a certain point, there will be something that will appear that you might not foresee. And that's where it's important to investigate those thoughts, investigate all of that. And also remembering that essentially you're cultivating a still focused mind so that you can actually see, understand what is the point of basically being in the present moment. We're not in the present moment just for the sake of being in the present moment. But we're in the present moment, we're cultivating this awareness, this constant awareness in order to see how we fabricate greed, hatred, and delusion in every single moment, and how we can understand how to apply the teachings of the Buddha in order to dispel them, to get rid of greed, hatred, and delusion, so that we can have that happy mind in every single moment, as we were talking about that earlier, that unconditional happiness. So keep building that strong mind, but also understand that there's a purpose, that we want to have samadhi in order to understand fully the three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And maybe the Venerables want to add some comments.
Good.
No? Very silent today, the Venerables.
Because you're covering the topics pretty thoroughly, so there's nothing needed to be added.
All right, thank you, Bante.
Is there a question online?
There's a question online. And I think this is really, they're talking about, I believe, referencing happiness and suffering. It says, doesn't happiness has the same origin, or is it the same as suffering? And it is only our personal perception that defines happiness or suffering.
Wait, I don't quite understand.
I'm gonna edit. It sounds like I think they're pointing to, does suffering and happiness have the same origin, and is it merely our perception? I believe this is what they're asking. And is it our perception that defines it as happiness or suffering? It's coming from the same place, and it's our perspective or where we're at. I believe that's what they're pointing to.
Okay, I see. Well, I mean, it's difficult to get into this kind of realm of discussion because then we're kind of getting into the English sort of words. So we use these terms as suffering, as happiness, and they can be pretty loaded terms, actually, where each one of us, even based on our culture, can have so many things that we apply onto it. I remember, for example, when I first encountered the Buddhist teachings and I was told the first noble truth, I was like, yeah, okay, everything is all, I mean, there's suffering, okay, in the world, but there's also a lot of good things, So I remember I wasn't particularly impressed by this word suffering. Sofferenza, it's a really charged word in Italian. There's a whole baggage of Catholicism, of imaginary that is very much tied up to suffering. And also happiness from my culture is very much tied up with sensual pleasures. So there's lots of different ideas through which, we think what is happiness. And I actually used to also think, aside from sensual pleasures, also this elation of happiness, this sort of sense of, like, unless I was like over the top, like, getting something that I really wanted, I was very ambitious. So I would like really aim at working so hard in order to get an objective. And then I would have this like high, right? Like, oh yes, I got this. And so that to me was happiness. So that's why I'm saying, like, we put so much, like, the definitions are actually kind of like a little bit more complex than what we say when we're talking about suffering and happiness in English. But in when we're talking in Buddhism about happiness, it's perhaps a little bit different than the happiness that we usually use the word for, right? And it's more, perhaps the better word is more contentment. So it's a happiness that comes from letting go. It's a happiness that comes from relinquishment. It's the joy of missing out. It is, though, the Buddha says that it is the highest form of happiness. So sukha. Actually, Bhante Sudaso can say the right Pali word, that is the Pali sentence that. Yeah. So nibbana is the foremost happiness that we can experience. So I got on a tangent and I forgot what the question was.
You're asking, isn't happiness and suffering just a matter of perspective?
I don't know. Is hunger or fullness a matter of perspective? We can go and philosophize so much about things, but I never was actually very much interested in philosophy. So I would say that have a gut feeling about it. Is something that makes you happy or something that makes you suffer? You can feel it. No different if you can say I'm hungry or I'm full. So we want to get to that understanding that is experiential rather than intellectual.
The next question is, it says, "Good morning, Venerables." So I'm assuming they're other side of the world. I have been reading about Asubha Bhavana. Is it a common part of the practice of developing, I believe they mean, sila?
Asubha.
Asubha.
Part of developing sila.
Do they say sila or does it say something else?
S-E-L-A.
Oh, they probably mean sila.
That's right.
S-E-L-A actually means stone. Sela means stone. I assume they mean sila.
Sila, as in morality. Asubha as part of developing sila, that's an interesting way to put it. But definitely asubha as a means to attain awakening. Absolutely, of course. So we are, actually, it's very much connected to what we were talking about earlier. Usually the definition of happiness, we normally think X, Y, and Z makes me happy. And we usually cultivate, very much this kind of attention, unwise attention, actually, we put attention towards everything that kind of glitters for us. So that glitters, that looks pretty, whether it's a physical body, whether it's like a piece of art, whether it's anything, the mark of the beautiful, something that we really, really like. And the Buddha says that we have a distortion. For example, a distortion of view. We tend to think that this body, for example, is beautiful, or that body is beautiful, or that body is ugly, or that thing, in a very particular way. But actually, both when we're relating to our own body and when we're relating to the other bodies, we have this partial understanding, this partial perception. When we start doing these practices of asubha, so looking at the mark of the unattractive in everything, it's not to become depressed, but rather to fully understand what actually this body is. So I remember doing these practices, and actually, for example, for the first time, having an awareness of all the greasiness that comes, for example, in the skin, or the wetness and the sweat. Like right now, we're all sweating and it's all sticky and kind of gross. And to a certain extent, we are aware of it. But then when we actually become really, really aware of it, we're like, this is kind of pretty gross. Or the constant shedding of elements that we have from the body. Constant, hair. There's so much. We're so obsessed with hair, in every single culture worldwide, but it's actually dead matter. this literally like chunk of dead, dead flesh, dead crap, that we see as so pretty. And so this is the distortion. So we see like this unattractive thing as very attractive. We tend to think of things as being permanent, this big thing, like the stone, the idea of it being permanent, solid, reliable. Well, actually, now that we take care of this monastery, we are definitely seeing how unreliable and impermanent this stone is, with all the leaks and this and that, and the cracks and here and there. You really get a sense of that. But what is really important, once again, is understanding, first and foremost, our distortion of view. And Asubha meditation is, once again, a way of not, once again, becoming depressed, but rather becoming fully aware, fully understanding, fully knowledgeable of our experience, rather than only looking at what we want to look and create basically our experience of the world. Basically, we're constant storytellers, screenwriters. Yeah, and we have this beautiful Hollywood movie, or horrible. Sometimes we also like to write horror stories, or or dramas, or comedies, but they're not fully real. There's just a few elements that are correct and some others that are completely like built up. So with Buddhist practice, we want to become fully aware with how things are, not how we like them to be, not like how people told us they're supposed to be, not like our tradition X, Y, and Z, like in Italy tells us that things are, or whichever tradition it is, but rather coming into deep understanding with the way things are. So I don't know if I answered or addressed it. Maybe if the person has a follow-up question.
Well, there's another question from Anthony, who says, "Hello, venerables," and I guess related to that, how do you develop the perception of unattractiveness, ugliness, which?
Well, I think I covered that a little bit already. Then maybe at another time we can actually do a special on meditation. Otherwise, it will be.
Fascinating topic.
Yeah.
Questions started.
I would just emphasize that asubha does not mean ugly. Asubha means non-shiny or non-beautiful. So we're not actually trying to see everything as ugly. We're just trying to see things exactly as they are.
Yeah.
Things are neither ugly nor pretty. They just are exactly what they are. And actually translating asubha as non-shining, which is actually a more literal translation. It's like Ayyā Somā was saying. Normally we see the world as made up of all these shiny, interesting, attractive things. But actually nothing is shiny. It's all dull. So there's nothing here that's worth getting obsessed about.
Well, so Christina asks, "Hi, if you're under the spell of sensuality and then practice of subha, aren't you running the risk of developing a fetish problem?"
I think we should just do
should do a special on asubha, but I would say actually it's quite the opposite. I think it's usually the uncultivated mind that creates fetishes.
Yeah, because that's a function of desire.
Yeah.
Whereas asubha practice tends to lead to the reduction of desire.
Yeah. And to dispassion, essentially. Not to extra passion in weird, kinky ways.
And this is a follow-up to the question about happiness and suffering. I mean, when you have a reason like the monk's rules, eating little, for example, it becomes contentment or happiness, while before following the rules, it was only suffering. So what is suffering can change to the opposite and become satisfaction and happiness. It is only our interpretation of that that makes it one way or the other.
No, it's just, once again, a habit. So sila, one of my favorite translations of the Pali word sila, is actually not morality, but rather habits. It really shifted entirely my understanding of the precepts and made me obsessed with the precepts, actually. That's why now I have 311. I started racking them up because it's great. Because basically the reason why we take these precepts is to take on new habits, right? So for example, for lay people, the 5 precepts are 5 incredible habits. You know, the habit of not killing. It's a habit. We have the habit of killing. So we take the habit of not killing to replace the habit of killing. We toss it away. Similar, the habit of not taking what is not given to us. It's a great habit to have. But we also acknowledge that actually our mind usually has a lot of habits of taking what is not given to us. And so we have the desire, at least, even if we restrain ourselves to do it, we're like, oh, I want what she's having, you know, like I want, like keeping up with the Jonases, I think you say in English, right? Joneses, I bet. That one, close enough. But that's what it is, right? We're keeping up with all our neighbors because we're constantly wanting things. So a lot of people, most people actually will eventually, due to that greed, take what hasn't been given to us. When the Joneses, whatever, are not looking, then you're like, ooh, let me get their patio set. So that's a really harmful habit. So we take the habit of not taking what is given to us. The same thing, sexual misconduct. Why do we have that habit of not engaging in sexual misconduct? Because most of us, after a while, will get very bored with our partner, you know, if we're lay people. And we're going to go, okay, next partner, and we don't care whether it's with, they're already seeing someone else, or if they are consenting to a certain point or the other, etc. So all of these harmful habits are present in the majority of people. So we take the habit of not engaging in that. Same habit of lying. Who has not said a white lie since they were born here? Great. Nobody has lied here. Great, because you've taken the habit, the new habit, the precept of not lying. So none of you pretended that you were saints. So it's understanding, once again, that the mind tends to lie. And so we take a new habit, or the habit of intoxicating ourselves, you know. We tend to, want to not experience most of what we're experiencing. So either we tell ourselves a story, like either, or like, as I was saying, creating a movie. But then when that doesn't work, then we're like, okay, let me drink some alcohol, let me take these other substances and so forth. And it becomes a big habit. So we take instead the habit of not engaging in, not using substances that cloud the mind. And so that creates the habit of a sober mind, a habit of lucidity. So essentially, not eating after noon, it's exactly the same thing, but in a more subtle way. It's not that there's anything wrong in having dinner, for example. It's not that, like, if you have dinner, you're going to go to hell, but rather it's taking a habit, creating the conditions in order to practice self-restraint, in order to be okay, for example, with the feeling of hunger. Actually, getting back to my nephew, last night we were talking and he was like, well, if I can't eat this and I can't eat that. And he was not even on the 8 precepts, but he was away from home. So he couldn't, he knew that he couldn't just like open the fridge and take whatever he wanted, etc. So he was, I was like, yeah, well, you can be happy without eating, right? And if you're hungry, you're hungry. You can develop that happiness. And he was like, yeah, actually, I can do that. I can be happy while being hungry. So I got it straight away. It was really quite sharp. sharper than I've been, not only at 8 years old, but also like it took me a while to get on or understand the value of these precepts, of these habits. So creating the conditions in order for us to be happy, essentially. So this is what we're doing. I would forget too much the word play. Not get too obsessed with the definitions, or is that like a construct of the mind, etc., but rather go, what is my experience right now? Well, my experience is obsessing with food, taking refuge in food. I enter the kitchen, and I mean, I'm not saying that is what is right now, but like we should be very honest with ourselves. That's exactly what was my experience when I started Buddhist practice, actually. I was used to taking refuge in the fridge. If anything was going wrong in my life, I would open the fridge or I would open the pantry and eat. Very instant sensual pleasure. So we understand that we have that habit. Instead, we take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dhamma, in the Sangha. And so we let go. It's a practice of relinquishment. We take these precepts so that we create new habits where we're like, okay, oh, great. Have dinner, no dinner, it's fine. There is dukkha right now in the mind. I will find another escape, which is not through sensual pleasures. And that way we learn how to be happy unconditionally. All right. So Bhante Sutta, so that is very good with time, is letting me know that we have just run out of time tonight. So
There's no other question. Lots of
Thank you
thanks.
very
And
much.
Anthony, thanks.
Great.
For your translation of a Sutta. He sent us thanks and his appreciation.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for the people online, but most importantly for the people live in flesh that have come to the monastery. The monastery would not exist without you all, both alive and live. So it's good to see you all. And tomorrow, every Sunday, here at the monastery, we have a whole full program. So at 8 a.m. there is a volunteer opportunity, and then usually so far it has happened each time. There's a meal offering about 11 a.m. To the Sangha and to everyone who is here. Then can also partake in the offering, the food offering afterwards. And then in the afternoon there is an afternoon of mindfulness. And then every Saturday we're meeting here outside at 6 p.m. So you're all welcome to join us for the rest of the warm or warmish season. All right. Okay, so we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we forgot